Why do we self-sabotage even though we know exactly how we would prefer to be? In today's video, we're going to answer that exactly. What drives self-sabotage and a pathway to do something about it. So perhaps you are frustrated because you are someone who can see the potential version of yourself you'd like to be and just find it hard to actually embody that, to be that version of yourself you'd like to be, because certain patterns keep playing out over and over again. No matter how much you understand yourself, no matter how much you try and tell yourself you wish to be a different way, you slip back into old patterns over and over again. And so many of us refer to this as self-sabotage. In this video, I'm going to really outline a fairly clear model to explain why this unfolds, but I've also made an earlier video entitled Why It's Hard to Change, and that one starts with the basics of the subconscious, unconscious and conscious mind and how they interact to, I guess, set the scene for what I'm about to go into now. So if you'd like to go back into the basics of how the mind's compartmentalized, check out that video. But today I'm going to talk about parts. That the human mind is made up of different parts, and this is an explanation for why self-sabotage occurs. The model that I'm drawn to, and if you watch any of my other videos, I'll reference it quite often, the internal family systems model, is the basic underpinnings for this video, although I should highlight pretty early on that my take on IFS or my particular version of IFS has some, I guess, other creative elements that I've brought in based on other learnings I've gathered over the years, and my own personal take on how we are structured as human beings. So I just want to be very clear that this isn't pure internal family systems. Richard Schwartz is the originator of internal family systems therapy. There's plenty of videos out there if you want to go and look up IFS in its more pure form. I am using IFS as the basis for what I'm going to share today, but there will be other trimmings, I guess, added and other ways to explain it that I have found works for myself and my clients. So parts. I guess another thing to point out before we go further into parts is that IFS is not the only model that refers to working with parts of the psyche. There are other models out there. One that I've come across is referred to as clinical resource therapy, another parts model. And I think if you look into the personal growth and spiritual growth world, you'll come across lots of references of doing shadow work, and effectively that is along the same lines as working with parts of yourself. Inner child work, same kind of concept, a part of yourself that is needing nurturing, is wounded, is hurt, which will feature in my explanation in a moment also. So, well, let's pull out my little diagram because that will help make sense of what I'm talking about with parts. So let's start over here with self. IFS refers to it as self-energy. I just like the term self to describe this core essence of who we are, I guess how we came into this world before all of the programming got overlaid. And these words that I've used to describe self, non-judgmental and compassionate, Richard Schwartz will refer to non-judgmental more in using his 8 C words, curiosity and clarity. I've kind of just combined the two of those together to capture this essence of non-judgment that we come into this world embodying, I feel. So let's look at a little child. I use this example to help make my point. If a 2 or 3 year old child has come into the world, had a very smooth start, not really any early traumas, birth traumas, major stresses or dramas, there's a good chance they're going to go out into the world, that little 2 or 3 year old, naturally asking questions like, why does that person look like that? Why has that person only got one leg? All these curious, clear questions. They're not coming from any kind of space of judgment whatsoever. They're just simply exploring and stating things clearly and curiously about their perception of the world in a non-judgmental way. Now, of course, that could result in some negative feedback from adults at some point. For example, if that child then got told, no, that's wrong, you shouldn't say those sorts of things, and felt really scolded and felt like they'd done the wrong thing, something like this could be internalized, a sense of failure, that child may carry that hurt, depending on how intense that feedback is, and that could be the start of or the basis of a wounding, and in a wounding, particularly if it's repeated a bunch of times. It can happen from a one-off event, but certainly if it's repeated, more likely to be a significant wounding, or if it just happened at a real crucial stage of development, it can really sit there as a wounding. Compassionate, that child is also very likely to go out into the world and want to connect with the person at the cash register, the child at the park, every animal that they come in contact with, just naturally desires to care and connect to other beings in the world, and that is likely to stay in place, maybe until some kind of feedback comes that it's not safe to connect with everyone in the world. And I haven't really mapped that on here, but an example of that could be feeling like it wasn't safe to. So if we got told, or that child got told that strangers can be dangerous, because I guess children have to be told that. Unfortunately, not everyone in the world is kind-hearted. Then that fear, that anxiety can be internalized as a different one of these woundings, and then another layer of protection can be placed over the top, which I'll elaborate on in a second. And I like to refer to this core sense of self as just being. That child coming into the world does not have an agenda at all, and this is consistent with IFS, that self does not have an agenda, not trying to fix, not trying to problem solve, not trying to do or achieve anything. The essence of who we are is here to experience life as a being. We're called human beings for a reason, because the essence of who we are is to experience. We're not called human doings, human beings. So this speaks to the nature of who and what we really are. But as I said, we don't tend to stay that way. We get wounded by the world, and it doesn't have to be that these sorts of woundings I'm listing here have come from something really major and significant. For some of us, yes, big traumas really carry some powerful emotional woundings for us. But for a lot of us, it can be a lot more subtle. So don't compare yourself to the next person that might have, major trauma and think that you don't have any woundings. It's relative to your own experience. And so these are some other examples here. So feeling unloved. So again, that child may have been perfectly loved by parents, but let's say around 2 to 5, when their little personalities start to come out and they seem like they can handle entertaining themselves a bit more and get sent off to daycare, or parents have to go back to work, etc., that child can have an experience that they're not feeling loved enough. They're not getting enough attention, even though the parents haven't stopped loving them, but the experience of that child is they're not feeling enough love. So that's all that really matters. It's not whether the adults thought they were loving the child. It's that the perception of that child. An example of then a protective part coming into play would be the people pleaser. So we get wounded, and then a protective part gets overlaid to try and stop that from happening again, because it doesn't feel nice to feel unloved. So maybe if I give and I give and I give and I give, then love will come back to me. So that people pleaser part is trying to compensate for that by giving and giving and giving, hoping that something will come back in return. Technically, a people pleaser part isn't unconditional in its giving. It expects at some point to get something back. And that's why you'll find sometimes people who are really in people pleasing mode will give and give and give, and at some point they will start to get quite resentful that they're not getting it back, because the part expects something back at some point. Not unconditional love. This you can unconditionally love. So it's not that we don't have unconditional love there as well, but that part doesn't necessarily come from unconditional love. Powerlessness. So that could be another experience that a lot of us could have when we're young, particularly around adults. We don't have the power, we don't have the voice, don't feel like we can get our way, etc. And I've mapped here two different ways that are very opposite of each other that protective layers can form. So a passive part is one. Now, why is passive a protector against being powerless? Well, the answer to that, I see it as being, is if I just give my power away, it's better than having it taken. So passive being go with the flow, don't rock the boat, don't make a fuss. That kind of way of being is better than trying to fight for power and then still losing out in the end. So passive is a protector. But then equally, the same person could have both these parts forming when they're young, and depending on the situation, flip between the two. So the opposite is, probably when we're young, it's a part that wants to take charge, wants to have the power, wants to fight back. Maybe when we're young, it didn't really work because the adults overpowered us and shut us down. But as we get older, that bit, starts to get its chance, and we rebel and fight back and are blunt and direct and all sorts of things. So, and as I said, the same person could have both types, or, the same, or two different people in the same family. One could, and both experiencing a similar type of powerlessness. One could go that way, one could go that way. And I've got the plus and minus there because that's referring to what we call a polarity, two parts in polar opposites kind of pulling against each other if they were both in existence in the same person. So what I'm effectively saying here is the reason that we self-sabotage, or what we might call self-sabotage, let's say we want to be more self-loving and then keep slipping into people-pleasing. Why do I keep doing that? Why do I keep agreeing to things and giving? Because this thing just takes over. So these protective parts basically just hijack the self. They blend in with the self and run their agenda through self as the way we respond or react to the world. So that would be an example. Or why can't I stand up for myself more? Why can't I have a voice? We decide we want to have a voice and then just slip into going quiet anytime there's a confrontation or a conflict. The passive part has taken over. It's happening at a subconscious level. It's not your conscious mind that is deliberately doing this. It's a protective part operating out of your conscious awareness, taking over. Same with the take charge. Obviously, if we decide we want to be the opposite, we want to be a little bit more calm or a bit more respectful and let other people have a chance to lead, but we keep taking over, or that part. This one down here, which I touched on at the start, this could be the key to, say, someone who's struggling with perfectionism. Why can't I stop being so perfectionistic and having such high standards of myself? Because this do it right part, continues just to think it's got to protect, otherwise there's going to be this experience of failure. And the reason I've got these coloured in red is because they are the carriers. So in IFS, they're referred to as exiles, and to exile something or someone is to send it away. Don't want to have to feel that, don't want to feel failure, don't want to feel powerlessness, don't want to feel unloved. These parts don't know what to do other than just to try and push that emotion away. And so that's why they stay very strong in their protection. They're just working their butt off to try to keep you safe. And so hence, self-sabotage is not trying to hurt you, it's trying to protect you. Even though these parts are likely to become overprotective or misled in their protection. And IFS as a model or parts work, brings the focus back over to here, to the self, to interact with these parts in a way that's very open and receptive, and again, not running an agenda to try and help these parts to maybe be aware of how they're functioning and how they might adjust to be more helpful in the way they function as parts of you. What I haven't mapped on here, probably should have put it on the diagram, are other parts like the logical part, or the problem-solving part, or the critical part. So those parts, let's say a logical part might be trying to tell this people-pleaser part, hey, stop being such a people-pleaser, or, the passive part, like, why are you being so standoffish? There's no reason to be that way. And why hasn't it changed? Logic is not enough to help these parts to relax back, because even though that logical part might be bringing up a very valid point that's very kind of accurate in its feedback, in coming in, the logical part is basically telling these parts, sort of sending the message that, hey, go away, you're too much, you're not helping here. It's invalidating those parts to make them feel like they're not welcome. And that'll never work, because you cannot delete any parts of you. Once they are part of your system, they're always going to be part of you, but they don't have to stay functioning the same kind of way that they have been. They just need a bit of support from self, compassion, understanding, curiosity, to help them feel first welcomed as part of the system rather than rejected and attacked by logical or critical parts. And secondly, brought up to date with where things are right now, maybe, and here's a very interesting phenomenon that happens within parts work. Some of these parts don't actually know how old you are. That might sound odd, but they don't. For starters, this is the only you that's experiencing everything. Self is the witness, the observer that's just taken everything in neutrally in the background the whole time. This is your sky, this is the weather, these parts of you that are constantly changing, and this is the constant you. And so these parts are more like coming in and out and reacting or responding and then withdrawing again, and they don't actually know, quite a few of them, how old you are. So being brought up to date with how old you are can be a big game changer for these sorts of protective parts, so that they don't have to self-sabotage so much, or they don't have to kind of keep hijacking, taking over. And some of them just don't realize that there's a downside to how they're doing their job. They don't tend to respond by being attacked by the logic or the criticism to try and tell them they're doing a bad job. But when they're given the space to kind of reflect on it themselves, these parts, they can often find that there is a downside to how they function, and are willing to work with self, this core essence of who you are, to adjust things. Now, I probably should point out this one, the shutdown that I've drawn here. That's another layer of protection. Again, a key component of IFS. this kind of protector is what's referred to as a firefighter. These protectors referred to as managers, as in trying to manage things, keep things running smoothly, trying to be proactive and stay ahead of anything that could go wrong or things as they're happening to kind of correct them. A part like a shutdown part is when everything gets a bit too much. These parts haven't been effective. These wounded parts are getting stronger, so those circles are getting bigger and bigger maybe. And the shutdown is just like, all right, I don't care what the consequences are for the shutdown, whether it means that you pull away from everyone or whether you don't go to work tomorrow or whether, you freeze up and embarrass yourself. The shutdown doesn't really care. The firefighters don't care if they come and stomp on your garden and put water all through your house. As long as they have put the flames out, they've done their job. So that's what the firefighter parts are. They're a bit more extreme. A shutdown, self-harm, binging on drugs and alcohol. And at the top of the pecking order, last line of defense is the suicidal part. The part that just goes, well, if we can't calm everything down in the system, then is this the only way? Now, that part generally does not want to win because it knows it's going to take itself out at the same time as the rest of the system, but it's there as the last line of defense. And so, this is why the self-sabotaging is so hard to stop. Particularly if you're trying to do it with just your conscious mind and an analytical mind, it's not going to shift. Whereas parts work like that offered by IFS gives a way of turning inside. It's experiential work. Generally, when I'm doing it with clients, close your eyes and engage with these parts. And as I said, help the protectors be less intense. Probably should have pointed out, at some point you often get in contact with these ones that are carrying the wounded emotions, and they can be, if I can rub that out, unburdened. Which means whatever the baggage is that those parts are carrying around can be released. And it's not actually as hard as some people might think. They just need to be given permission that it's okay to let go of that emotion now. It doesn't have to be a big shudder or a big cry even. And then these parts are going to be a lot more relaxed as well, because there's not that pressure from the wounded parts in the background pushing forward. So the protectors can ease up again. Now, it's not just a case of doing this once and happy days, these protective parts settle down. It's a relationship you form with different parts of yourself, particularly parts that are your more dominant ones, or what I call your frequent flyer parts. They will need ongoing work, but that doesn't mean you have to always stop and do a meditation every time one of them triggers off. Over time, and the parts can just respond to you coaching them on the run and having a little bit of self-talk to catch them and realise that they might be slipping back into old ways and bring them back on track. So, hopefully that brings some clarity to self-sabotage, and I highly recommend working with someone that does parts work. As I said, IFS is probably one of the more popular models, but there are lots of really experienced and capable practitioners out there that can guide you into working with these parts and helping you to reduce the self-sabotage and get back to being and accessing this, who you really are, your core, loving self.